The morning sun was just beginning to warm the glossy windows of JFK International Airport when Sarah Mitchell pulled up in her black Tesla. She checked her watch, 7:30 a.m., right on schedule. After 15 years of building her career, Sarah had learned that being early was just as important as being good at your job. The airport staff were starting their morning routines as Sarah stepped out of her car. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue blazer over a white shirt, paired with matching pants. Her natural hair was styled neatly, and she carried her favorite brown leather briefcase, a gift she had bought herself after her first big promotion. As she walked toward the private aviation terminal, Sarah couldn't help but smile. Just 10 years ago, she had been a junior analyst, taking crowded commercial flights and dreaming of the day she'd make it big. Now, at 35, she was a senior vice president at Goldman Stanley, one of the largest investment firms in the world. The private jet wasn't just luxury. It was a necessity for her busy schedule managing global markets. Sarah's heels clicked against the polished floor as she entered the terminal. The private aviation area was different from the main airport. Quieter, more exclusive, with soft leather chairs and fresh flowers on glass tables. The morning light streamed through large windows, making the space feel open and peaceful. A few other business travelers sat reading newspapers or typing on laptops, their designer luggage placed neatly beside them. Pulling out her phone, Sarah quickly checked her emails. 3 new messages from the Tokyo office needed her attention, but they could wait until she was in the air. Her flight to Chicago would take just over 2 hours, plenty of time to prepare for Monday's big meeting. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the executive lounge, reminding Sarah that she hadn't had breakfast yet. Usually, Maria, her assistant, would have a coffee waiting for her at the terminal, but Sarah had given her the morning off. Maria's daughter had a dance recital, and Sarah remembered too well how it felt to have parents miss important moments because of work. As she approached the security checkpoint, Sarah reached for her ID and flight documents. She had done this hundreds of times before. Same terminal, same schedule, same routine. Many of the regular staff knew her by name, often greeting her with warm smiles and casual conversations about her latest business trips. Today, though, something felt different. The usual security guard, Tom, wasn't at his post. Instead, a new face looked back at her, a middle-aged man with gray hair and hard eyes. Sarah maintained her professional smile as she walked forward, documents ready in hand. She noticed how the guard's eyes followed her movement, his expression changing from bored to suspicious. Sarah was used to these looks, the supple doubts, the unspoken questions about whether she belonged in such an exclusive space. After years in the finance world, she had learned to let these moments roll off her back like water. Sarah thought about her father's words from years ago. "Baby girl, you'll have to work twice as hard to get half as far. But don't let that stop you. Let it fuel you." Those words had carried her through college at Harvard, through her MBA, and through countless boardroom meetings where she was often the only woman of color. The morning light caught the silver pendant around her neck, another gift, this one from her grandmother who had worked as a housekeeper her entire life. "Remember where you come from," her grandmother had said, "but never forget where you're going." As Sarah reached the security desk, she pulled out her company ID card and flight authorization with practiced ease. Her fingers brushed against her phone, where a photo of her team celebrated their latest successful market expansion. In just a few hours, she would be back in Chicago, leading a strategy meeting that could potentially bring thousands of jobs to communities that needed them. Little did Sarah know that this routine morning was about to become anything but ordinary. The new security guard's next actions would spark a chain of events that would not only challenge her dignity, but also test her leadership in ways she never expected. But for now, she stood tall, confident, and professional, exactly as she had trained herself to be through years of breaking barriers in the corporate world. Security guard James Peterson was having a bad morning. His coffee had spilled on his uniform, his teenage son had failed another math test, and now he had to cover an extra shift at the private terminal. He didn't like changes to his routine, and he definitely didn't like working in what he called the rich people's terminal. As he watched travelers pass through his checkpoint, Peterson straightened his badge and adjusted his collar. A group of older men in expensive suits walked by, nodding at him as he waved them through. This was what he expected at a private terminal, wealthy executives who fit his idea of success. When Sarah Mitchell approached his desk, Peterson's expression changed, his eyes narrowed, and he stepped out from behind his station before she could even reach it. "Excuse me," he called out loudly, holding up his hand like a stop sign. "This is a private terminal. The main passenger entrance is in the next building." Sarah kept her professional smile in place, though her heart began to beat faster. She'd faced situations like this before, but it never got easier. "Good morning," she said clearly, extending her company ID and flight documents. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, flying to Chicago this morning on the Goldman Stanley jet." Peterson barely glanced at the documents. "Ma'am, this area is for private aviation only. Executive flights." He emphasized the word executive while looking at her casual designer outfit with obvious doubt. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Several nearby passengers stopped to watch the scene unfold. A young businessman in a gray suit lowered his newspaper, frowning as he observed the interaction. Two flight attendants standing near the coffee station exchanged worried glances. "Sir," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady, "if you look at my documentation, you'll see that I'm authorized to be here. I fly through this terminal regularly." She pulled out her phone, opening her flight confirmation email. "I can show you additional verification if needed." Peterson crossed his arms. "Look, I've worked security for 20 years. I know who belongs here and who doesn't. Maybe you're lost, or maybe someone gave you the wrong directions, but this isn't where you're supposed to be." His voice grew louder with each word, echoing slightly in the quiet terminal. Sarah felt her face grow warm, but years of boardroom negotiations had taught her to control her expressions. She noticed how other travelers were being waved through without even showing their IDs. A white woman in yoga pants and a designer sweater had just walked past Peterson without any questions. "I understand you're doing your job," Sarah said, her tone professional but firm, "but I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm a senior vice president at Goldman Stanley, and that's our company jet I'm boarding this morning." She held her documents higher, forcing Peterson to look at them. Peterson snorted. "Right. And I'm the President of the United States." A few onlookers gasped at his sarcasm. "Listen, I don't want any trouble, but if you don't leave now, I'll have to call for backup." Sarah's hands were steady as she pulled out her business card. 20 years of breaking barriers had prepared her for moments like this. She thought about all the young black women in her mentorship program, about how she told them to hold their heads high even when the world tried to push them down. "Go ahead," she said calmly. "Call whoever you need to call. I'll wait right here." She took a seat in one of the leather chairs, placing her briefcase beside her. "But while we wait, you might want to actually read the ID in your hand. And maybe reflect on why you assumed I didn't belong here without even checking my credentials." Peterson's face reddened. He finally looked down at the ID card he'd been holding, his expression changing as he read the title under Sarah's name. But before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tense atmosphere. "Sarah, I thought I heard your voice out here." The terminal's senior flight coordinator, Angela Torres, was walking quickly toward them, her face showing concern as she took in the scene. The morning was about to take an unexpected turn, and James Peterson had no idea just how badly he had misjudged the situation. Angela Torres, the senior flight coordinator, walked quickly toward the growing scene. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached, her face showing a mix of concern and disbelief. She had known Sarah Mitchell for 3 years and had never seen anything like this happen before. "Is there a problem here?" Angela asked, her eyes moving between Sarah and Peterson. She noticed Sarah's perfectly calm exterior, though her knuckles were white from gripping her briefcase handle. Peterson straightened his uniform, trying to maintain his authority. "Ma'am, I was just explaining to this person that she needs to leave. This is a private terminal." He emphasized each word as if speaking to a child. Sarah remained seated, her posture perfect and professional. "Officer Peterson here," she said, gesturing to his name badge, "seems to have trouble believing that I belong in this terminal, despite my valid documentation." Angela's eyes widened. "Officer Peterson, Sarah Mitchell is one of our most frequent flyers. She's been using this terminal twice a week for the past 3 years." She turned to Sarah with an apologetic look. "Sarah, I am so sorry about this." But Peterson wasn't ready to back down. His face had turned a deeper shade of red, and sweat began to show on his forehead. "Look, I'm just doing my job. We can't be too careful these days. How was I supposed to know?" "How were you supposed to know?" Sarah interrupted, finally standing up. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel behind her words. You were supposed to know by doing your job properly, by checking my ID and flight documentation, which I presented to you immediately. The same way you should check everyone's credentials, not just those who don't fit your idea of who belongs here. More people had gathered around now. A young flight attendant was filming discreetly with her phone. Two pilots stopped their pre-flight discussion to watch. The morning sunlight streaming through the terminal's windows seemed to spotlight the unfolding drama. I've watched you wave through several other passengers without checking their IDs, Sarah continued, including a woman in yoga pants who didn't even show you any documentation. So please, explain to me and everyone here exactly what made me different. Peterson opened and closed his mouth, but no words came out. The terminal had gone completely silent, every eye fixed on the scene. Angela stepped closer to Peterson, her voice low but firm. Officer Peterson, I need you to step aside right now. Ms. Mitchell needs to board her flight, and you are causing an unnecessary delay. But Peterson made one last attempt. I was just following protocol. Protocol? Sarah's laugh was short and without humor. Let's talk about protocol. I'm going to spell this out very clearly, not just for you, but for anyone else who might need to hear it. She pulled out her phone and opened her calendar. Every Monday and Thursday for the past 3 years, I have flown out of this terminal. That's approximately 300 flights. I never had an issue until today. What changed? The question hung in the air like heavy smoke. Everyone knew the answer, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the now silent terminal. I am a senior vice president at one of the largest investment firms in the world. I manage global markets and oversee billions in investments. But before you knew any of that, before you even looked at my ID, you decided I didn't belong here. And that, Officer Peterson, is not protocol. That's prejudice. Angela touched Sarah's arm gently. Your pilot just called. They're ready for boarding. She turned to Peterson, her expression stern. Officer Peterson, please report to the security office immediately. I'll be speaking with your supervisor shortly. As Sarah gathered her things, a slow, steady applause started from somewhere in the crowd. The young flight attendant who had been filming wiped tears from her eyes. An elderly businessman nodded approvingly. But Sarah didn't acknowledge the applause. This wasn't a victory to celebrate. This was just another Monday morning, another barrier, another reminder of how far society still needed to go. As she walked toward her gate, head held high, she pulled out her phone. She had a call to make, not to complain, but to ensure that what happened this morning would lead to real change. Angela Torres had worked at the private terminal for 12 years, and she prided herself on running a smooth operation. As she walked with Sarah toward the jet bridge, her mind was already racing with the steps she needed to take to address this situation. Sarah, please wait a moment, Angela said, touching her friend's arm gently. They stopped near the large windows where a sleek Goldman Stanley jet waited on the tarmac. The morning sun reflected off its polished surface, creating a gentle glow around them. Sarah turned, her professional mask still firmly in place, though Angela could see the tension in her shoulders. Angela, you don't need to apologize again. This isn't your fault. No, but it happened on my watch, in my terminal, Angela replied, pulling out her tablet. And I need to document exactly what occurred. She looked up at Sarah with determination in her eyes. This isn't going to be swept under the rug. As they talked, Peterson's supervisor, Mark Chen, rushed into the terminal. He was a middle-aged Asian man who had worked his way up through airport security over 20 years. His face showed genuine concern as he approached them. Ms. Mitchell, he said, slightly out of breath, I just heard what happened. I want you to know that this type of behavior is completely unacceptable. He turned to Angela. Peterson has been removed from duty immediately pending investigation. Sarah adjusted her blazer, a habit she had when gathering her thoughts. Mr. Chen, I appreciate your quick response, but removing one guard doesn't solve the underlying problem. A group of terminal staff had gathered nearby, including the young flight attendant who had filmed the incident. Her name was Jessica, and she stepped forward nervously. Miss Mitchell, I hope you don't mind, but I recorded what happened. I thought it was important to have proof. Sarah smiled at the young woman, her first genuine smile since the incident began. Thank you, Jessica. You're right. It is important to have proof. Too often, these situations become a case of the said, she said. Mark Chen nodded gravely. With your permission, we'd like to use that footage in our training programs. This incident, it's a perfect example of what not to do, but also how our passengers deserve to be treated with respect regardless of their appearance. As they spoke, other regular passengers began approaching Sarah. Many were executives who had seen her in the terminal countless times. They'd offered their support and shared their own observations of Peterson's behavior. William Barnes, CEO of a tech company who often flew out at the same time as Sarah, spoke up. I've been watching that guard all morning. He didn't check my ID at all, just waved me through. The discrimination was blatant. Angela was taking notes on her tablet, documenting each person's account. She looked up at Sarah. Would you be willing to help us revise our security protocols? Your experience. Well, you could help us make sure this never happens to anyone else. Sarah checked her watch. Her flight needed to leave soon, but this was important. I'll have my office contact you. This isn't just about one guard or one incident. It's about systemic changes that need to happen. Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a message from her company's CEO. Just heard what happened. Take all the time you need. Board wants to discuss implementing diversity training programs at all our private terminals. You're making a difference. As Sarah read the message, she felt some of the morning's tension begin to ease. This wasn't the first time she'd faced discrimination, and sadly, it probably wouldn't be the last. But this time was different. People had witnessed it, recorded it, and were ready to take action. Angela walked with Sarah to the jet bridge entrance. You know, Angela said softly, when I started working here, I was the only Latina in management. Every time something like this happened, I felt so alone. But watching you handle this situation with such grace and strength, you showed everyone how to stand up for what's right. Sarah paused at the entrance to the jet bridge. The morning's events had delayed her flight, but sometimes delays served a greater purpose. As she looked back at the group of people gathered in the terminal, the supportive faces, the determined expressions, the mix of ages and backgrounds, she realized that maybe, just maybe, this incident would lead to real change. By noon, the morning's events at JFK's private terminal had spread throughout the airport's staff network. Officer James Peterson sat in the security office, his uniform collar feeling tighter than usual as he faced the terminal's management team. The small room felt even smaller under the weight of what had transpired. Do you understand the seriousness of what happened this morning? Mark Chen asked, placing a folder on the desk between them. He opened it to reveal Sarah Mitchell's complete profile. Ms. Mitchell isn't just any executive. She's one of the most influential people in global finance. Peterson's face paled as he looked at the documents. The profile showed Sarah's impressive career history. Harvard Business School graduate, youngest VP in her firm's history, and now Senior Vice President of Global Markets. Her department managed over $50 billion in investments. She had been featured in Forbes' 40 Under 40 list twice. She oversees more money than this entire airport makes in a decade, Angela Torres added, her voice firm but controlled. But that's not even the point. The point is that you didn't even look at her credentials before making assumptions. The young flight attendant's video played on a laptop in the corner. Peterson watched himself on the screen, seeing his actions from an outside perspective for the first time. His dismissive tone, his aggressive body language, the way he had immediately assumed Sarah didn't belong, it all looked much worse than he had realized. I was just trying to maintain security, he mumbled, but the excuse sounded hollow even to his own ears. Mark slid another document across the desk. This is the log of ID checks from this morning. Would you like to explain why you checked only 23% of white passengers' credentials, but stopped every single person of color who came through? Peterson's mouth opened, then closed. The numbers didn't lie. Let me share something with you, Angela said, pulling up another file on her tablet. Ms. Mitchell flies through this terminal every Monday and Thursday. She's contributed to our employee education fund. Last Christmas, she donated enough money to give every cleaning staff member a $1,000 bonus. She knows most of our regular staff by name. The revelation hit Peterson like a physical blow. He remembered the cleaning lady who had tearfully told him about the unexpected Christmas bonus that had helped her pay for her son's college textbooks. That had come from the very woman he had tried to throw out. Just then, a notification popped up on Angela's tablet. She read it and looked up at Peterson with raised eyebrows. The video of this morning's incident has reached Goldman Stanley's board of directors. They're not happy. They just announced they're conducting a full review of security protocols at all private terminals they use worldwide. Mark Chen leaned forward. Do you understand what this means? Your actions this morning didn't just affect you or even just this terminal. They've sparked a global corporate review of how private aviation handles security and bias. Peterson slumped in his chair. 20 years of security work, and he had never stopped to examine his own biases. He thought about his teenage son, who was struggling in school. What kind of example was he setting? Outside the office, the regular terminal staff gathered in small groups, discussing the morning's events. Many shared their own stories of witnessing similar incidents but feeling powerless to speak up. Jessica, the flight attendant who had recorded the video, was showing her colleagues the mounting responses on social media, where the incident was gaining attention. You know what's really impressive? One of the baggage handlers said during their break. Ms. Mitchell could have gotten Peterson fired instantly. She could have called the CEO, made threats, thrown her weight around. But instead, she turned it into a teaching moment. She showed more class than he showed prejudice. Angela's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, who had landed safely in Chicago. Just finished a call with our board. The message read, "We're developing a comprehensive training program for all aviation staff at our partner terminals. Sometimes the wrong moments lead to the right changes." As the afternoon sun streamed through the terminal windows, Peterson sat alone in the security office, reading through Sarah's professional achievements. Each accomplishment felt like another weight on his conscience. He had judged a book by its cover and, in doing so, had revealed far more about himself than about the person he had tried to exclude. Sarah Mitchell sat in her office in Chicago, looking out at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was late afternoon, and her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the morning's incident. The video had spread rapidly through social media, and now her inbox was flooded with interview requests from major news networks. Her assistant, Maria, entered the office with a concerned look. "The board of directors is asking if you'd like to press charges against Officer Peterson. They're fully behind you if you want to take legal action." Sarah turned from the window, her expression thoughtful. "No," she said firmly. "Legal action isn't the answer here. Punishment doesn't create change. Education does." She stood up and walked to her desk, where dozens of emails waited for her response. "But what he did was wrong," Maria insisted, her voice shaking slightly. As a Latino woman, she had faced similar situations herself. He should face consequences. Sarah smiled gently at her assistant. "He is facing consequences, Maria, but not the kind that make headlines." She picked up her tablet and showed Maria a message she had just received from Angela Torres at the terminal. Peterson had requested a meeting with Sarah, not to beg for his job, but to understand where he had gone wrong. Just then, Sarah's phone rang. It was Jessica, the flight attendant who had recorded the video. "Ms. Mitchell? I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I just wanted to say, well, the video has really started something. Other people are sharing their stories. It's like everyone was waiting for permission to speak up." Sarah put the phone on speaker so Maria could hear. "Thank you for having the courage to record it, Jessica. Sometimes we need to see ourselves through other people's eyes to understand the impact of our actions." After ending the call, Sarah turned to her computer and began typing. She had a different kind of response in mind, one that would turn this incident into an opportunity for growth. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she drafted a proposal. Project Understanding, a comprehensive approach to aviation security and inclusion. Mandatory bias training for all security personnel. Regular diversity workshops led by industry professionals. Anonymous reporting system for passengers who experience discrimination. Monthly review of security interaction data to identify patterns. Mentorship program for minority professionals in aviation. Maria read over her shoulder, her eyes widening. "You're creating a whole program." "Yes," Sarah replied, still typing. "And Goldman Stanley will fund it. We'll start with our regular terminals and expand from there." She paused, thinking about all the young professionals who would come after her. This isn't just about one security guard or one incident, it's about changing the system. Later that afternoon, Sarah held a video conference with Officer Peterson. His face appeared on her screen, looking tired and ashamed. But Sarah wasn't interested in his shame. She wanted his understanding. Officer Peterson, she began, her voice calm and professional. I appreciate you asking to speak with me, but before you apologize, I want you to understand something. This conversation isn't about making you feel better or worse. It's about making things better for everyone who comes after me. Peterson nodded, unable to meet her eyes even through the screen. I've never thought of myself as prejudiced, he said quietly. But watching that video of myself, I didn't recognize the person I was seeing. That's actually a good place to start, Sarah replied. Recognition is the first step toward change. She shared her screen, showing him the outline of Project Understanding. I'd like you to be part of this, Officer Peterson, not as a security guard, but as someone who can speak honestly about recognizing and addressing their own biases. The proposal on the screen represented more than just a training program. It was a bridge between the world that was and the world that could be. As Sarah explained the details to Peterson, she thought about her grandmother's words from years ago. When they go low, you go high, but make sure you build a ladder for others to climb up too. By the time the sun set over Chicago, Sarah had turned a moment of discrimination into a movement for change. Her response wasn't about revenge or punishment, it was about progress. She had chosen to transform a barrier into a doorway, showing others that sometimes the best response to prejudice is to pave a better path forward. 1 month after the incident at JFK's private terminal, the changes were already visible. New signs hung in the security area, reminding staff to check everyone's credentials equally. The terminal's atmosphere felt different, more welcoming, more professional, more aware. Angela Torres stood in her office, looking at the growing pile of applications on her desk. After Sarah's story went viral, the terminal had received hundreds of resumes from minority candidates interested in aviation careers. The incident had sparked a conversation that was long overdue in the industry. These numbers are impressive, Mark Chen said, reviewing the monthly security report. Passenger complaints are down 60%, and our satisfaction surveys show improvement across all categories. He pointed to a graph showing consistent ID check rates across all passengers, regardless of race or appearance. Jessica, the flight attendant who had recorded the video, was now part of the new training committee. She walked into Angela's office carrying fresh data from their first month of implementing Project Understanding. The anonymous reporting system is working, Jessica reported, placing a folder on Angela's desk. We've received 47 reports of previous incidents that people were afraid to mention before. It's helping us identify patterns we never saw. Meanwhile, at Goldman Stanley's Chicago headquarters, Sarah sat in a conference room surrounded by executives from various airlines and private aviation companies. Her Project Understanding had caught the attention of the entire industry. The costs are minimal compared to the benefits, Sarah explained, showing slides of the program's initial results. We've already seen improved efficiency at security checkpoints because staff are following proper procedures for everyone, not wasting time on discriminatory practices. One of the airline CEOs leaned forward. What about Peterson, the security guard from the incident? Sarah changed the slide to show a familiar face. James Peterson was now working with the program in a different way. After his suspension and completing intensive training, he had become one of their most effective speakers on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias. Officer Peterson's transformation is actually one of our success stories, Sarah said. He's spoken to over 20 security teams about his experience. His honesty about his mistakes and what he learned has been powerful. Back at the terminal, Peterson himself was leading a training session for new security staff. His face was more open now, his posture less rigid. I used to think I was just doing my job, he told the group. But I was doing it wrong. Security isn't about assuming who belongs and who doesn't. It's about following the same professional procedures for everyone. The young officers listened intently as Peterson shared security camera footage from that morning. Watch how I didn't even glance at some passengers' IDs, he pointed out. That's not security, that's prejudice wearing a uniform. In another part of the terminal, a young black woman in a business suit walked confidently through security. The officer on duty smiled professionally, checked her credentials thoroughly, just as he did for every passenger, and wished her a good flight. The woman was one of many new executives using the terminal, feeling welcome in spaces that might have seemed hostile before. Sarah's assistant Maria was updating the project understanding statistics when a special email arrived. The Aviation Security Administration wanted to implement the program nationwide. They had seen the data: safer airports, happier passengers, more efficient operations. All because one woman had chosen education over anger. That evening, as Sarah prepared for her regular Thursday flight back to New York, she received pictures from terminals across the country. Changes were happening everywhere: diverse hiring practices, standardized security procedures, improved customer satisfaction scores. Her phone buzzed with a message from Angela. "You started something bigger than all of us." In the JFK terminal, the sunset painted the windows golden as the evening flights prepared for departure. The space felt different now, not just because of new signs or procedures, but because of a fundamental shift in awareness. Every person who passed through those doors, whether staff or passenger, carried a better understanding of what true security and respect looked like. A framed quote now hung in the terminal's staff area, words that Sarah had spoken during her first meeting about Project Understanding. Real change doesn't come from punishing mistakes. It comes from creating an environment where everyone learns to do better, be better, and understand better. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning at JFK's private terminal. Sarah Mitchell stood at the same security checkpoint where it had all begun, but everything was different now. The terminal buzzed with a new energy, one of professionalism and genuine respect. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," said Amara Johnson, one of the new security officers hired through Project Understanding's diversity initiative. She checked Sarah's ID with the same careful attention she gave every passenger. "How was your weekend?" Sarah smiled, noticing how natural and professional the interaction felt. This was exactly what she had hoped for: not special treatment, just equal treatment. "It was productive, Amara. How's the mentorship program going?" "Amazing," Amara beamed. "Officer Peterson's daughter just joined as my mentee. Can you believe it? She wants to work in aviation security too, but do it right from the start." This news made Sarah pause. James Peterson's transformation had been one of the program's most surprising successes. After his initial suspension, he had thrown himself into learning and change. Now he taught bias awareness at police academies across the country, using his own story as a powerful example. Later that morning, Sarah attended a special ceremony in the terminal's main hall. Goldman Stanley was announcing the expansion of Project Understanding to 50 more airports worldwide. Television cameras captured the moment as Sarah stood at the podium. 6 months ago, in this very terminal, we saw how a single incident could either divide us or unite us, she began, looking out at the diverse crowd. We chose unity, we chose growth, and most importantly, we chose to learn from our mistakes rather than be defined by them. In the audience, familiar faces watched with pride. Angela Torres sat next to Mark Chen, both now promoted to oversee the program's regional implementation. Jessica, the flight attendant whose video had started it all, was there with her new team of training coordinators. "The numbers tell an impressive story," Sarah continued, changing the slides behind her. "Passenger satisfaction up 85%, security incidents down 40%, employee retention improved by 60%. But the real success isn't in these statistics, it's in the stories of change." She gestured to a group of new employees, all from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in aviation. "These are our first graduates from the mentorship program. They represent the future of aviation security: professional, unbiased, and truly focused on keeping everyone safe." After the ceremony, Sarah walked through the terminal, remembering that morning 6 months ago. She passed the spot where she had stood her ground, where she had chosen education over anger. The memory was still sharp, but it no longer carried pain, only purpose. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maria. "Turn on the news." Sarah looked up at the terminal's TV screens, where a major airline was announcing the adoption of Project Understanding's protocols across their entire network. The ripple effect was becoming a wave. As Sarah prepared to board her flight to Chicago, she noticed a young black girl watching the security procedures with curious eyes. The girl's mother, dressed in a pilot's uniform, was explaining how things worked. "And they check everyone's ID the same way?" the girl asked. "Yes, sweetie," her mother replied. "That's how it should be. Sarah smiled, remembering her own childhood dreams of success in a world that didn't always want to make space for her. Now, she was helping to ensure that the next generation would find more open doors than closed ones. Back in her office that evening, Sarah received an unexpected letter. It was from James Peterson's teenage son, the one who had been struggling in school when everything happened. He wrote about how his father had changed, how their family discussions were different now, and how he had decided to study social justice in college. Your response to my dad's mistake, he wrote, taught me more about leadership than any textbook ever could. Sarah placed the letter in a special folder marked Reminders. It joined other mementos from the past 6 months. The original training proposal, photos from graduation ceremonies, thank you notes from new employees, and news clippings about the program's success. The sun was setting over Chicago as Sarah finished her day, casting long shadows across her office. On her wall hung a new frame, the Goldman Stanley mission statement, updated to include a commitment to inclusive excellence. Below it, in smaller letters, was the phrase that had become Project Understanding's motto: change begins with a moment, but transformation lasts a lifetime.